talking about the outline that we mentioned in the beginning of the conference. As you said, we began with an analysis and review of the superpowers. We then talked about phase 2 of this funnel, the regional powers. And now we begin the third and final chapter, the internal or domestic Israeli arena, which is very important. And the major reason why the Israeli arena is important is because this is at least my belief. I hope that you'll agree with me. But within the internal Israeli arena, most of the processes are within our hands. We control to a great degree, on what's happening to us, our fate. And if we choose correctly, we can do the right things with the interests and the vision of Israel and its governments when we have a government. So, we will begin here a session that we've been holding, I don't know, several years now, which is maybe a view into a very important issue between the relationship between the Jewish majority and the Arab minority in Israel. We have a department in the INSS that deals with this and research on this issue, and we would like to basically open a window into this internal world and hear from distinguished Arab panelists and ask them questions and ask what their views on the relations of Jews and Arabs in Israel today. Now, I'd like to remind you that every fifth citizen in Israel is an Arab citizen, and this big and important minority, this population, and their welfare is enormously important to the future of Israel and the stability of Israel. So this progress towards the full incorporation of the Arab minority in Israel is, in our opinion, a clear Israeli interest, apart, of course, from the ethical and moral obligation that all citizens of Israel have the same opportunities. I would like to mention that any development within Arab society is an achievement of the state of Israel and all its citizens, and conversely, the weakness or frailty of the Arab population, such as in the education gaps, the very severe education gaps that we've heard yet again about, is terribly impactful on all of Israel. And we believe, and I propose to join me in this understanding, that it is the role of the state to take care equally the welfare and security of all its citizens, Arabs and Jews alike. And in the last few years, despite the obstacles and barriers and the very low starting point, there is a very encouraging trend that we're seeing in the last few years. And so the big question that I would like to pose in this session is this positive trend going to continue, maybe even accelerate, or sadly deteriorate, decrease, and stop? Now, before I show you the first slide, then I want to say that minority versus majority relations in Israel are very dynamic, typified by a very challenging combination of three main trends. The first I would call the increasing tendency of the Arab population, most particularly the young and intelligentsia of the Arab population, to be part of and incorporated in Israeli society, economically, in terms of employment, in terms of society, and I would like to emphasize also politically, maybe even more politically than ever before. And this is while preserving their unique ethnic identity as Arabs and Palestinians. Now, I'd like to talk about this slide here and show you that in our annual survey, what we see very clearly is that when we ask the Arabs of Israel what are the things that are most important to them, we see that the political issue and the national issue, the Palestinian national issue, gets 20% of the vote of people who say that this is the most important issue. All of the rest of the issues, and particularly the question of equality of rights in Israel, over a third of people, 37%, mention this and take it and talking about social distress, 8%, and other issues such as security in Arab localities, meaning domestic security, personal security, particularly in light of the horrible wave of violence among Arab population. So we see that the Arabs of Israel, we see this year after year very clearly. First of all, the Arabs of Israel want to take care of themselves, their own security, their welfare, and their personal rights and equality of rights. So that's the first trend that we see, and we see it very clearly, and that's what we want to see, the desire to be incorporated. Now, the second slide, or the second trend, if you would, is the other side of the coin. Sadly, very sadly, I have to say that when Jewish Israelis are asked how they view Arabs or the Arab citizens of Israel, only 21%, this is our last survey, only 21% of Israel's Jews that responded see the Arabs of Israel as full and equal rights citizens. The rest are divided into two groups that have a very clear and important distinction. The majority, over 50%, 54% to be exact, of the Jews that responded to the survey say that that this person sees Arabs and the Arab citizens of Israel are people who should be respected, but also suspected. So it's sort of a quasi or sort of hybrid view of respected but suspected. And 25% of the Jews that responded in the survey, meaning a quarter of the respondents, see Arabs as potential enemies. So I think that these numbers are bad. I mean, we've seen in the last few years when we've asked the same questions in the polls that we see slight variations, but this is an ongoing trend. This is a trend that I believe is not helpful to us to promote the issue of Arabs in being incorporated fully into Israeli society. But this is the picture as we see demonstrated in our polls. Now, I go now to the third dimension or trend, which is more innovative. The policies of the government of Israel in recent years is characterized by a very clear and sensitive duality. On the one hand, one cannot hide the fact that the government of Israel is treats the Arab minorities oftentimes in an exclusionary way, and with a narrative and rhetoric which is extremist, and oftentimes because of concrete political interests. So it's not only a question of narratives. The Israeli government oftentimes has slid to legislation. Look at the nationality law. The nation state law, sorry. So we can see that there are clear attempts, and quite successful, sadly, concentrated attempts, including financial budgets between 10 to 15 billion shekels over a 5-year span for the development, the economic development of Arab society. We'll talk about the 5-year plan from December 2015. Which is, and I want to say very, very positively, that right now already the government of Israel, towards the end of this first 5-year plan, is already preparing the next 5-year plan, despite the fact that we don't exactly have a regular government. We have an interim government, but we already have another 5-year plan for economic development of the Arab minority in the offing. So that's a good thing. So I believe that there's an enormous contribution in promoting the ability of Arabs in Israel to be incorporated well into society. And we have to say that this particular program, the 5-year program for economic support, is showing advantages, even though it's riddled with problems in planning and also in the decision making and implementation. It's still a good thing. So overall, these three trends are fed by the phenomena and processes within Israeli society. We talk, of course, about the wave of violence in Arab localities, and of course, with the Trump plan, the possibility of reopening the whole conversation about state negotiations with the Palestinians. All of these things raise questions in regards to the future. What's going to be more important, the incorporation of Arabs that we would like, or is it going to be more hostility, alienation, estrangement, and exclusion? So these questions questions. I mean, in order to hear about them, to answer them, we invited three very distinguished panelists. I would invite the first panelist from your left, Professor Mohammed Essawi, head and president of the Al Qasim College, a prominent man of education, of course. Next to him, we have Ms. Ula Najami Yusef, one of the heads of the joint Israel Arab Jewish list, and of course a person who's been working very hard to promote all of these issues that we're going to be talking about today. And Dr. Mohammad Alnabari, who is a scientist and entrepreneur, and before he was the mayor of the Regional Council of Hura. Okay, can you hear me? Wait, you can hear me through this. I'm getting, I got a tag on mic, so this is the first time I'm using it. So, okay. I would like to ask all of you first the same question. Wait a second. The first question that I'd like to ask all three of you, I'd like to ask each of you to describe how you see these issues on a personal level, from your own personal perspective. So let's begin with Ola, okay? We give you 5 minutes. Can you hear me? Okay. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for the invite to be here. Okay, how will we talk about incorporation versus alienation, what it means to be a Palestinian Arab woman who's a citizen of Israel? I think that the first story that I encountered maybe 20 years ago was when I finished high school and I decided that I would like to pave my way to university. I went to university, and then the first barrier appeared. You can't study this at the age of 18, only at the age of 21. And I started wondering why. Why is there an age minimum to study a particular major or that in university? And initially I couldn't understand, because I come from a very traditional family. Citizens, we're all citizens, so I said, okay, I didn't go to the army. 21 is the age in which Israelis who do army service go to they finish their army service. And I thought, okay, well, I didn't go to the army. What am I going to wait till the age of 21? This Israeli academy, this Israeli university won't tell me when I can study and what I can study. So I decided to leave, and I decided to find my way out. And the way out that I found was in the territories. I decided to learn in the Birzeit College, and thankfully or sadly, I don't know, I was studying during the time of the second Intifada, where I basically there encountered the other side of the state that I had lived in for 18 years as a citizen, an equal citizen in Israel. I didn't know what politics was at the time. And then everything, I mean, that I know of today is thanks to those days in university, that period of my life, which was a difficult period. At that time, 13 young Arab people were killed by the Israeli police, the police that is supposed to protect me as a citizen of Israel, the police that's supposed to give me the fair and optimal service, just like they do for every citizen of Israel. So it took me to a place where I had to meditate on Israeli politics and where am I in terms of my identity. Am I part of a state, part of a country, and an entire nation? Am I part of a minority? What does it mean to be a minority within Israeli society? And then I began, I continued on my path and my career, but there's no way I couldn't continue my career over there. I had to go back to Israel. I went back to my family, to my society, to my country, the country that I am a part of. And then I met the second barrier, which I'll talk about in just a second, the second obstacle. I think the reality that we're in today, despite the fact that I believe that in these last 20 years, a lot of effort has been put in to take us ahead and advance our situation, and yet decisions are made constantly that constantly beat us back down and constantly regress the process and make us wonder again, is there a common future for all of us in Israel? I do believe there is a common future for all of us, but I think that it's going to be a long and arduous trek full of barriers and obstacles along the way to get there. But do I think it's possible? Yes. Another minute and another 2 minutes. So what do you do in your work in the Abraham Foundation to promote this vision? Okay, well, when I came back to Israel, I found it very difficult to be incorporated in Israeli society, and I decided to work only in Arab society. And at some point in my life, I came to the understanding that this is not going to work. There's no one common ground. There's no common ground for me. And then I started to looking for living in coexistence, Jews and Arabs, and that's how I came to the Abraham Foundation. I now work about safe communities, making services accessible in Arab localities, and restoring the relationship between the police force and the local residents. I think we'll talk about that later, so maybe I should. Okay. Dr. Nabari, I give the mic over to you. Same question, I assume you'll give me a different answer. Okay, well, I grew up in the Negev region. I'm a Bedouin that grew up in a tent. So, and I did my education here in Israel, my first degree and second degree in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and then I'm a chemistry major. I have advanced degrees in chemistry, so I was a scientist. I didn't think anything beyond the Bedouin ecosystem until I was chosen at the age of 34 to be head of the regional council of Hura. And then I looked at the challenges of the society in which I'd been reared. And I thought, well, first of all, we are the polar extremes of Israeli society in the worst way. Everything that's the highest or the lowest, that's us, the Bedouins. Lowest education, Bedouins. Lowest per capita wages, Bedouins. Highest unemployment rate among Bedouins. In health, the worst situation, Bedouins. Housing and education, and Bedouins. And this, of course, is after many years of neglect. And sadly, neglect not only from the government, but a double neglect, because the local leadership of the Bedouins did not try to be part of the Israeli revolution. They just stayed behind, quietly, living their lives in the desert, living the desert nomadic life. And within a short amount of time, they saw that there is a chasm between us and the rest of Israeli society. And that was in the 1990s, because a challenge arose. And everybody talked about at the time, there was huge media coverage, the ticking time bomb of the Bedouins in the desert. The Bedouins will be the worst thing that happens. And then there were civil society conversations. The Shoshani report was a big deal at the time. And everybody was stuck on both sides, the government and also local Bedouin leadership. Nobody could figure it out. Nobody wanted to change the vector from looking at the problem to finding solutions. And then a very interesting language arose. I've heard this language in government offices and among Bedouins. Everybody talks about the problem. Nobody wants to take responsibility for this reality and to provide any kind of address. And slowly we became victims. And the narrative changed, and it became part of our culture. Oh, we're entitled people, we're downtrodden, and we're prejudiced against and biased against. It's all true. It's all true. But on the other hand, when I turned to the ministerial and government offices, I saw the absolute opposite. The fact that they're saying we can't work with the Bedouins. Every time we try to help them, they're not partners. They won't work with us. There's corruption among the Bedouins. They're tribal. They have no true leadership. And that's true as well. The Jews were absolutely right. But instead of trying to bring the two extremes together to solve the problem, everybody got entrenched in their own problems. And I, as head of a regional council, I was in a tug of war. my residents, my constituency are pulling me in my direction. I lived there for over 15 years. And the first 5 years, by the way, they called me the crazy man from Khura, because people were constantly saying, how you dare you try to break through the glass ceiling about you and to think that you will create real change. And in the government ministries, they said, oh, calm down. You think you're so full of yourself because you have an education. Nothing will happen. But it required a tug of war in which we brought the two sides closer together and finally created a model that you can look at it and even apply it in other places. So the challenge of the Bedouin society is, vast. We are in a very advanced sort of medium, let's say. We're in a very advanced environment, and the depth of problems within Bedouin society are very severe. And so when people come to solve the problems, everybody tries to tell you, oh, that's never going to happen, because everybody wants solutions, like quick solutions within a year or two. But the government is a horrible initiator. In fact, all governments that I've seen are terrible at taking risks specifically and turning things around quickly. Certainly the governments are slow versus the private sector and the third sector. So in terms of the government, there's no overall strategic plan. They're just peaks of assistance. And after we finally proved that in a tiny, very weak and poor regional council in the desert, we can make such huge changes in a relatively short amount of time, whether it's a model in the education system that from a completely failed system is now 3 times, 4 times the number in terms of percentages of success, and the women working from 3% to 33% within 7 years. That's how we built these processes in order to make changes from within. But the government did not stand on the sidelines. They did provide their assistance. Thank you very much. Professor Essawi, hello, good afternoon. I'm going to begin with the issue. I don't know, I'm looking at things, from the lofty height of my age. I'm looking at these great young energies around me. I'm an older person. I have so much love in my heart for this place that this country that I'm in, this land that I'm on. And I am also involved in Arab society, in Israeli society. I'm also very self-critical, very critical of my society, and critical of Israeli society, because the truth is we can be different. It can be changed. We can create a light, not at the end of the tunnel, but within the tunnel, to guide us outside. So the things that I'm going to talk about are milestones, at least as I see them. When I got to El Qasim College, I'd gone through several things already in my life. I'd already gone through a couple of crossroads. Personally, I was a deputy director of a research laboratory, and for years, and I replaced a person that at first challenged me, and that was very difficult for me. He would always listen to classical music in the room when I was working with him, and then when he left the room, I'd turn it off. And I'd say, what is that music? And then this guy would come back to the laboratory, and he'd talk about the symphonies that he's listening to, and I said to him, okay, wallah, what does this guy want from me? God. Then on my birthday, this guy also brought me books, because he wanted to open the world before me. And I even remember there was a book by Kafka. And then I came home, I put it on the shelf, this gift from, and Hamat asked me, did you read the book I gave you for the birthday? And I'm thinking, oh my God, leave me alone. What does this man want from me? So it was hard for me. It was hard. It took me time to adjust, to appreciate the humanistic personality, the great man that I was working with. Even talking about him, I'm a bit choked up. And he was an amazing man, a great man. And that was a seminal time in my life, being his deputy in the research laboratory. And after 5 years in which I moved from a theological seminar under a mosque and managed it. I had a religious way of life. Religious dress, The women are all modestly dressed. Separate entrance for boys, a separate entrance for girls, training the teachers and the faculty. I mean, within that world itself, there were barriers. And I came to that place in order to assess. I mean, even after the State of Israel, that was in 1995, the Israel had sent a group of Arab scholars to be basically organizational consultants. That was in the way in which the Israeli government tried to help the local municipalities of Arabs. They didn't understand why people were waiting outside. I mean, he didn't. I mean, in Israel, Israelis, they didn't understand people. They didn't understand the differences between Israeli and Arab society, and they wanted to train people to understand the characteristics of Arab society. And I was one of the people sent by the Israeli government in this delegation, and then afterwards helped join the FEQM, and I became an organizational consultant. I had to assess the schools and institutions, and even when I was interviewing girls there in that institution, they wouldn't even meet my eye, and I said, oh my God, is this Israel? But then I took that college, and I thought to myself, that was in 2005. I am going to open a classical music desk. And I thought, oh my God, where is this from? Where did I think of this? But then I started writing about the ethical clash and the fact that its potential to instigate change. Meaning there is no change without confrontation. Every society has certain conditions, whether it's human rights and freedom of thought and freedom of expression. These are the three conditions upon which open societies live. But in Arab society, it's conservatism versus free choice. And there's modest dress and tribalism. And we don't create knowledge. It's not a question of buying knowledge. You turn into an engineer or a doctor. You don't create any knowledge if you don't instigate education. So we had to lead change, and our college became one of the leading colleges in the State of Israel after that. Okay, well, this is what will serve as the backdrop for our second question, where each of you will be asked to present us with what you think the three major things that should be done in order to really accelerate the incorporation of Arabs in Israel. Essawi, you were talking, so give us your personal vision. Okay? You go first. Well, just as I concluded the first question, we have two sides here to examine. First, on the one hand, the self-criticism I have. I mean, where I come from as an Arab man in Israel. And I say taking responsibility over myself, my own problems, our problems as Arabs. I look at the Arabs of Israel as if they're in a sandwich. Like, they're stuck. So how do you unstick them? How do you, on the one hand, I have the authorities that, even my dear friend Meir has talked about the fact that how recently in the last few years, the government of Israel has become more radical and is becoming more and more prejudiced, more racial, more exclusionary. And that's really the real test of the democracy here in Israel. And sadly, at the moment, it's failing. And then there are the internal obstacles within our society, the status of women in Arab society, for example, and a traditional approach to organization. How can I deal with these problems? Well, first of all, let's talk about the two last issues. You need to be aware of the situation. Second, you really need to talk to the Arab leaders of Israel, and they have to have the gumption to really tackle these things head on and to really look openly at Arab society and speak the truth about it. And then I say very sadly, the public leadership of the Arab minority in Israel has yet to do that. I mean, it cannot be that I'm sitting here now and I'm talking for human rights and I'm talking about women's rights, but then I enter my home and suddenly I don't believe in those things. You can't do that. No, the Arab women, despite all of the changes in education, is still excluded from any position of power, excluded from a position of decision making. It's enough to look at the localities of Arab municipalities. I don't think we have a single Arab woman who's leading municipalities. Maybe in Nazareth there's a couple on the city council, but no female mayor. And I look at the heads of regional councils. According to what? They're all based on your extended family, the Khamula. If you're part of an extended family, a big one, an important one, you can be nominated. If you don't, no. We shouldn't appoint heads of tribes to be our municipal mayors and regional council leaders. And what we saw in the El Qasim College, the model that I created, and I created this model with all due modesty. I created the model, and people ask me, are you an expert on organization? I say yes, but I'm an expert on organization in weakened groups and in difficult societies. That's my expertise. And in the harshest, most difficult place, under a mosque, in the most traditional, conservative place, I have opened something that is the instigator for social change, and that is the ethical encounter with what's really happening in your society. That requires bravery. I'm telling you, it really does. And yes, people have shot at my card, and I've had graffiti written on my house, but slowly, the resistance calms down. You know why? Because success speaks for itself. People who finish in our high school, our girls finish high school and then go to university and come home with great jobs and bring good wages. And women in our society are moving forward. And yes, let's turn into Singapore in that sense. Let's give people a place to breathe, a place to make money and have options in life. And then my dear Jewish friends say to me, Mohammed, with what right do you change the values of Arab society? I'm not changing people's values. I'm simply making higher education accessible. It's true that I'm creating clashes, and the clashes create energy, but either I take that energy of the clash towards my vision, and I'm successful, and I have been very successful. Thank you very much. I have also won a story. In 2007, I left for the US because I was a Fulbright scholar, and I said that would be my real test. Is it going to be a one-man show? Is there a system behind me? And I appoint a woman who's now one of the women who are leaders in Israeli society, not only Arab society, Israeli. She is a senior lecturer and a great woman, Dr. Dalia Avdeli, and her name is well known all of Israel. And she is acting president of the college. And they asked me, why are you appointing a woman when you leave for the United States? And I said, that's the real test. After so many years of working in the college, a woman will replace me. And she, after a few months, she not only a director of a college, she's a director of a school. She has over 250 employees. And I said, this will be the decision that breaks the paradigm. To put a woman, a capable woman, at the head of these institutions, at the head of the college. And this is worth 6 years of university, this decision. A leader needs to go against the grain, the dominant grain. You have to swim against the current. And the current in my society is conservative and religious and traditional, and you cannot help but clash with that view. And there are success stories, and this story gave our girls in the college and in the school to see if their director, their headmistress, and the director of the entire college is a woman, they can do it too. 3 key points to the incorporation of Arabs in Israeli society. Okay, let me divide it into 2 parts. First of all, national leadership and a view to the Negev. Many people say that the Negev is the strategic depth of the state of Israel, and I say that the Bedouins are the strategic depth of the Negev. They are a third of the Negev's population. The Bedouins are not a small population. In 2030, they will be 50% of Negev population. Up until now, I mean, that's a critical point of critical mass, and we're bringing all of the statistics down, meaning what you don't look at on a national level and see the potential, the vast potential of this population. We're talking about a population whose median age is 14. I was head of a regional council of children, 80% under the age of 30. People who are under the age of 30 are vast potential for change in a very short amount of time. And instead of saying that the Bedouins are people who are not law abiding, and that poverty among this group is so and so, and they are land grabbers, and we can also look at them as the biggest engine for growth in the Negev. Instead of leaving them alone for one generation, and and turning the Negev into the worst place to live in Israel. So if on a national scale, but the Bedouins, by the way, can't do this by themselves. This is a national project, and it would require people within Israeli society and Bedouin leadership to look at the Bedouin society and see that it requires change, massive change, and also procedural change, because the my mother tongue is chemistry. That's what I do. I'm a scientist. I'm a chemistry major. If you can't fuse the molecules together, they will fall apart. So if you can't fuse the molecules of the Negev Bedouins to the state of Israel specifically, and put them in close proximity to higher socioeconomic status towns, then you won't see anything improving. We can see settlements are being built in the Negev, but they're not actually settlements. They're not towns. They're basically entrenchment camps with the moats around them. I don't know why they require, because that measure of protection. And then you leave the gate, you meet the first Bedouin you meet them on malls, you meet them in universities, you meet them anywhere, and the common ground is then violated. So I would turn to my community first. I have already proven it's 19,000 in population, that you can have a revolution if leadership is willing. And I really identify with what you said. I was chosen in Chura from a family who doesn't have a single mandate, and yet I was chosen and elected 3 times in a row. But I was a leader, an entrepreneur that wanted to make changes within my community. I wanted to change the matriculation from 50% to 80%, and we had one of the best high schools in the Negev. We wanted to bring people to send them to university. 50% of the Bedouin high school students from Brig have gone, the high school students in our schools went to the Ben Gurion University of the Negev. So change is possible, and it's required, and it requires the right conditions, but it has to begin from the Bedouin society with the support from the outside. So I would say, as an entrepreneur, we, for example, establish the Stars of the Desert organization, which is basically a nurturing group for young leadership. People who have been marked as potential leaders of the Bedouin community, that can coalesce the various tribes into a common narrative that is geared towards growth. It's an organization that in the last 6 years has been established. We're now building an academy for excellence, and within a short amount of time, within 15 years, this organization is going to grow 500 young Arab leaders with a healthy narrative, top up and top down, and to look and see the problems in Arab society and Negev society specifically, and pull them up with them, with the support of the entrepreneurial help. There's of course great resistance for the tribal model and for norms, of course, that are classically Bedouin. The role of the classic school master, a school mistress, and then you need to make changes within the community. This is just to show as an example that without the government deciding that they want a long-term change among the Bedouins in the Negev, and make a couple of very difficult decisions, not only look at the Bedouins as a threat, but see the potential in them. And without that, you can't make overall sweeping change, because there's no development in the Negev without this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muhammad. Ola, please. So, what can be done? I'm kind of wondering, what can one present after the 2 amazing stories presented by my fellow panelists? Let me say the following. The first thing that we must do as a society is to assume responsibility for our place and for our position, but to also ask others to assume responsibility. Ultimately, we are part of a minority in Israel. I agree that the leadership must do even more. But, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a different leadership. This is the leadership we have. These are the mayors that we have. And the Israeli society, to the Israeli society, this is the Arab society that you have to live with. There is no other Arab society. We're not going to change one day and become a different society society. And when I point a finger at someone and ask him or her to do their job, I need to remember that when I point two fingers at him, three are pointed at me. And it means I need to take responsibility. And when we talk about integration, it is a triangle that cannot be separated between the Jewish community, the Arab community, and the government. You cannot separate these three parts of the triangle, because one side is broken. It simply won't work. It won't give electricity to the other sides of the triangle. I think that we are currently at a very sensitive political stage, and we can cast allegations at any side. The Arab side will blame the Jewish side and vice versa. But with the data presented here, 54% suspect. They respect the Israeli society, but they also suspect them. So, Descartes said in Arabic, I think, therefore I am, or I suspect and therefore I am. You exist and we exist. We're not going anywhere. This is the people we have here. This is our community. The Arab community is the Arab community, and the Jewish community is the Jewish community. What can be done? We can sit on the sidelines and say, we don't need to change anything. Let me give you an example. 13 young Arab men were murdered in the events of October 2000. So the crisis between the Arab community and the police, the relations were at a very bad place. And today we're at a different place. Today the Arabs are saying, we want you to open up police stations in our towns and villages, but we want you to change your attitude towards the Arab community. And I think it has made some progress, and that's thanks to our leadership and thanks to our mayors. What Dr. Mohammed Nabari just explained and presented, he was a leader, a local leader, elected by society, and the clans voted for him. That's our society. We have a traditional society, patriarchal society, and that's what we need to work with, to just give up and say we have no other option. Yes, we always have an option. As for female representation, I think that the change that can be found in Arab society is thanks to the integration of Jewish and Arab civil society organizations, women's organizations that had managed together to change the elections law, and in order to guarantee the representation of women in local authorities. And I think that if this journey would not have been a shared and joint one, we wouldn't have had representation for women. I still think that there isn't enough female representation, and we still haven't reached that maximal position or a place that we would like to see, a 50-50 ratio. But we have made progress, and we cannot ignore that progress. And all that progress was thanks to the collaborative work of the women's organizations, and not thanks to the government. But civil society, the women's organization, they could present the data to the state and explain why it would be advantageous for the state to have equal representation, why it would be advantageous to encourage women to integrate into the labor market. And I think it succeeded thanks to this collaboration between the Jewish and Arab organizations. Thank you, Ula. We have some time left, but I'd like to bring up a topic that I believe is one of the most problematic topics today in Israel in general, and that's the issue of the growing crime and violence within Arab society. I think the entire country should be mobilized to do something about that. What are the main reasons, if you could explain? You're each going to be given 2.5 minutes. Let's talk about restricting violence and crime in the Arab society. I can tell you about a personal experience. I was a mayor of a town that was ridden with violence, and we have our own type of violence, the Bedouins. Drug trafficking is the Bedouins near the borders, and tribal violence. You can have two kids fighting at school, and in the afternoon 3,000 people will be fighting each other. And we try to address this with various educational programs, and we even got sheiks to sign a convention that we copied from tribes in Jordan, and then another one we copied from Hebron. And regretfully, in 2008, there was a murder at the school, and that got everybody very, very upset, and now there was terrible polarization, and all of these educational programs went down the drain. And we realized that if we don't have an enforcement system, then our town won't be safe. So we came up with the idea to put in CCTVs, and the sheikh said, what, you're going to videotape women in the street? And we established a steering committee, and we started talking, and until people were convinced, I went to the mosque, to the imam of the mosque, who was the chairman of the committee, and I said, now on Fridays you need to preach that it's necessary. And once the community accepted that, we established an entire system, not of fake cameras. We installed 650 CCTVs in the public in Khoa, and they are on optic fibers. And do you think that it was the government that funded that? It was funded by philanthropists. We have 6 high schools, and every Thursday I have 2 police cars at the entrance to the town, because Friday there's no school and it's time off, and people, like to fight things out on Friday. So that was dramatic change. And that big brother element did so much more than all the educational programs that so much money was invested in. And this control was accompanied by police, and even the youth unit. We coordinated that they won't open criminal records. We wanted the youngsters to be interrogated for deterrence purposes. And let me finish by telling you that in 2012, the Khoa school system reported 246 violent incidents reported within the school system that has 8,000 students. In 2016, once the system was installed, only 9 cases of violence were reported on. Thank you very much. Ola, please, 2 minutes. I'm sorry that I'm rushing you. The subject of violence is something that is very dear to me. Let me explain first that personal safety, first and foremost, that is the responsibility of the state. It is the responsibility of the state, and after that I can talk about the responsibility of the society or community. Last year, 2018, there were 78 people who were murdered. In 2019, 89 people were murdered. That means that the number of murdered people in the Arab society is on the rise. And when we look at how they were murdered with firearms. And if we ask ourselves, what's the source of firearms in Arab society? According to data from the Ministry of Homeland Security and the police, the source is the IDF. So I ask myself, how the hell could weapons come out of the IDF and start, being passed around in the Arab society? There are 40,000 firearms within the Arab society. And I can say this as a mother, I'm telling you this as a mother. I want to feel safe. I want to feel that my son, when he goes outside to play in the yard or in the street, I want to know that he's safe, and that personal safety is under the responsibility of the state. And I am part of this country. I am a citizen of the state of Israel. It is my right to receive personal safety from the state, and it's also my right to ask of every government ministry to provide a system of cameras in Khoa. And you said that it wasn't funded by the government. And once we think about it, if this money would be invested in the Arab towns and villages, knowing that it would help reducing violence, it means it's the responsibility of the state. And now let's talk about the responsibility of the leadership, both the Jewish and the Arab, to ask for the needed for the necessary budgets and investments in order to improve the quality of life in the Arab society. There are cutbacks in the police budget, we know that, and this cutback will harm first and foremost the more disenfranchised community, which is the Arab community. I'd like to finish off by saying that I am here in order to bring the voice of my society and the voice of women within the Arab society. I met with Dr. Meir Elran in a military military base. At the entrance to the base, I was kind of afraid to go in or not to go in. I wanted to talk about the Home Front Command and emergency situations in the Arab society, and I found myself saying, no, if this is a place I can go into and bring the voice of my society, then I will go in. And that's also why I'm here, in order to present the issue of personal safety and the relationship between the police and the Arab community. In the little time we have, I'm not going even to take any time to conclude, please, sir. The question, I mean, when I come home, and today it's dangerous to be a successful family in an Arab town. If you are well off, if you are successful, there's a high risk that people will ask for protection from you. I have a good friend at Kfar Manda, the village of Manda. I'm from there, and they have already shot at his home 3 times because he's well off and he has money. So it's risky, it's dangerous to be well off in Arab towns and villages. How can we resolve that? The Arab community faces this anomaly, and you cannot train a person who can deal with the existing problems of society. We've forgotten our tradition. We said that we used to have tribalism. We used to have a sheikh that would solve the problems. He was the leader of the clan. But today we've opted for modernism, and there's no direction. So we're living in a very difficult time. So how do you return home with all that crime and violence and no personal safety? The higher education is on the rise, poverty is on the rise. Higher education, women study and they go to work, but women are also being murdered. But where's the responsibility? If we had some national priority here in Israel, then this thing would have been resolvable, and it must be resolved, because things can spill over, this violence can spill over into Israeli society. It's not just something that is relevant to the Arabs alone. And let me say something about Trump's plan. Despite the plan, or it's this deal, and despite the nation state law before and after it, we're going to continue and live in Israel. We're going to continue and create life and peace and democratic values that will be part of our societies. The absence of peace, the absence of democratic values, this comes at such a dear price, and history tells us that. I'd like to share with you one last sentence, please. I'm the chairman of a public committee for educating for shared life, and shared life in Israel. I appear wherever one can contribute to a shared life, to a more enlightened, more just society here inside Israel. Thank you very much. Well, I wanted to recap, but I don't think there's any need to conclude everything that's been said here. We've heard what they have to say. They spoke in a very candid, straightforward way. You assumed responsibility and you look into the future. I'd like to commend the three of you who represent the vitality of the Arab community in Israel, and we're going to continue and work together. Thank you very much.